Welcome to the Confident Retirement Podcast. Is doing the most important things alone a good idea? How comfy are you with your choices when it comes to life's biggest decisions? What is real peace of mind with financial confidence, and how can you get it? Kris Flammang and Mark Peachy are the founders of LPF Advisors in Sarasota, Florida. On the show, they bring together the best and brightest minds to share with you how to have a more confident financial picture. They empower listeners with simple, common sense and financial wisdom. And now, here are your hosts from LPF Advisors.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Confident Retirement Podcast brought to you by LPF Advisors. I am your host here always, Kris Flammang, and today I have the honor of hosting Ryan Reiffert on the podcast. His self-named law office based in San Antonio specializes in helping businesses, investors, and entrepreneurs through the full range of legal and business issues that can arise. His motto is, personal attention has no substitute. Ryan, thanks for being here and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kris. Really appreciate it. And hopefully I can teach a thing or two and provide some entertainment. And
yeah, let's do it, man. Let's do all of that. Okay, so I'm sure you have an interesting history. Take me kind of briefly through the high points of how you got to where you are today with your practice.
Yeah, so as you noted, I'm headquartered in San Antonio. So I grew up in San Antonio, born and raised. And then left when I was, 18 years old, went off to college, UT Austin, went off to law school, NYU, started practicing in New York for a few years at a major law firm, one of these 2,000 man firms that has offices all over the country. Then moved back to Texas because, New York City, although it is a wonderful and fun and all kinds of great place, has, high taxes and snow and people touching you on the subway. It just kind of got to me after 5 years. So anyway, moved to Houston, did a few more years at another one of these mega firms and, tons and tons of hours, tons and tons of work, great experience, great money, not so great quality of life. Then moved back to San Antonio and was working for a kind of small to mid-sized firm here. And I wasn't even there for maybe 7 or 8 months before one of their clients hired me away for a startup project that was a tech startup, basically a video sharing company, very well capitalized. We ended up running somewhere $25 million raise over several years. So I was the in-house counsel for that company for about 3 years, and they kind of hit a wall with COVID, unfortunately, as so many businesses did. Funding dried up. A whole lot of people were looking at their wallets for COVID. And as a result of that, I said, okay, well, I've got all this fantastic experience and I kind of see an opening in the market in San Antonio where I can sort of add some value for people who, are sort of in between the hometown lawyer space who kind of does everything and the hire a big law firm space. We're going to charge you $800 an hour for some kid who's just out of law school, right? There's a big, big gulf between those two for somebody who has a couple of specializations, a couple of things that they do. I don't do everything. I don't want to do everything. I have a few things that I focus on, a relatively small number, a relatively, maybe 10, 20% of the pie of your overall legal needs. I saw a space for something like that in the market. And, first year as the first year of any business was tough because I decided to launch right when COVID was kind of in full swing. It was a tough couple of months, but the last year or so have been good. Things have started to really pick up, and we're off to the races.
I like how you said that, and I've heard often, everybody wants all this knowledge, and I think they should know a bunch of stuff so they can answer any questions. But especially in business, I think it's important just to know a few things really well and be really good at those, and then find that group of people that can benefit from what you know. And then you can make a really big impact. So what do you think was the most important thing that was different about owning your own business versus working for somebody else? Was that the biggest draw, why you started your own, or what did you see as being the biggest advantage?
Several things. Number one, freedom over my own time to an extent that I mean, obviously you still answer to clients, right? And obviously if a client needs something, a client calls you with an emergency that says, hey, I need you to pull an all-nighter and get this done by first thing in the morning, right? If the client needs that, if you want to keep that client, you want them to be happy. I mean, you've got to do that. But I found, and not to malign anyone in particular, there were a lot of cases of kind of artificial deadlines where, okay, some partner says, hey, I need this report by Monday, I need this memo by Monday, whatever. And then it sits on their desk for like 3 or 4 days. Like, this was not an emergency. So having that control over my time that I can work until 7, 8 o'clock, and then I can go to the gym and do my workout for, hour and a half, 2 hours. And then I can get back home and say, okay, now I'm going to sit on my laptop on the couch and knock out kind of some of these low priority things. And just having more control over my own time was a huge one. And as well, what I'll say is kind of a sense of ownership, right? That, as I'm sure this will resonate to every single business owner out there, because I have a ton of them as clients, that you wear all the hats, right? Like I am, not only am I doing the legal work, I'm the marketing guy, I'm the HR guy, I'm the internet support guy. I'm the, I do all of it. I have people helping me with this. But at the end of the day, if something doesn't work, not only from a legal perspective, I'm doing the legal work too, but if my website breaks or my Google ads is wonky or whatever it may be, I've got to fix that. There's nobody else that's going to do it for me. There's nobody else that's going to take care of the client and make them happy. There's nobody else that's going to make sure the office is running. Like, the buck stops with me with all of that stuff, which is a ton of responsibility, but also kind of, gives you the freedom to do things the way that you see fit. And again, not to malign anybody in particular, but I think a lot of lawyers are relatively hidebound and relatively old-fashioned in the way that they want to do things. And I think the Zoom kind of revolution that was forced by COVID in particular has changed the game in a lot of places, in that, hey, that meeting really could have been a Zoom call, or that meeting really could have been an email. And I think clients like someone who is at least open to that possibility and doesn't kind of stick with, no, the way that we've done things for the past 50 years is the way that things must be done always.
We've seen that too, where a lot of my relationships that I've taken on new clients I've never met the person in person, right? I've never had a meeting with them one-on-one in a room. It's been virtual and it's been fine. And that really got sped up with the pandemic. And I wanted to ask you a question, a follow-up on something you said. So when you went back and started your business, you said that was 2-3 years ago, right? When you went out on your own.
Right at 2 years.
Yes. So if you could go back, it wasn't that far long ago, but knowing what you know now, if you could go back 2 years, what do you think you would tell that person? Is there something you wish you knew back then that you know now? What would it be?
I would say, even less than you think you know. Like, you realize that you're going on this journey and that you don't know anything, but you really, really don't know anything. Yeah. And just be ready to be wrong and be ready to follow the data and, do your experiments and, take your steps. But, if something isn't working, be ready to cut bait and move to the next thing.
Yeah. And you seem really engaged and motivated about the direction that your business is going. Is there something you like particularly right now best about what's going on with your business?
I think one of them is the freedom to work with, the freedom to tell clients no, like the freedom to kind of, obviously you can't tell everyone no because money is a thing and you have to actually feed your family and pay your bills and keep the lights on and all of that. But there are certain, again, maybe this goes back to your previous question of, lessons learned over the past 2 years. There are certain things that for me are red flags of like, hey, you don't want that client. And I took on a few of them at the beginning, just because I didn't know any better, right? Because being in a large law firm or even a small law firm, that the client intake process is not something that they show baby lawyers or even not so baby lawyers, right? It's not something that, these kind of senior partners, I don't want to say hide the ball, but like, you're there to do the work and do the billable hours and make everybody else money. You're not there to learn about how to build your own practice, right? That's not what they're interested in teaching you. And not to say they necessarily hide the knowledge, but they're just not interested in showing you how to do that because that's not what you're there for.
It's not what you're on a need to know.
Basically.
And right now you don't need to know.
Right. You get to see how some of the sausage is made, but not that particular sausage. You don't really see the client intake process. Yeah. So you don't really get to know, like, what are the red flags of, like, hey, you don't want that client. That dude's that's bad news waiting to happen.
You mentioned you have a few specialties, some things that you know really well that you focus on. So are there some areas of your practice that you find the most challenging and also the most satisfying?
I mean, not particularly, right? Because so I kind of have two main sides of the house, right? Like we have business law and transactional things, which can be anything from, hey, Ryan, I'm starting up a new company. I need to form an LLC. Well, okay, that's easy enough. I can help you with that, right? Or it could be, hey, I'm selling my practice. I'm a doctor. I run a widget company. I'm whatever. I'm selling my practice. I'm retiring, and this other guy's going to buy my practice for $10 million, and I need somebody to paper that transaction, get all the assets purchased, and get the bill of sale, and get the reps' warranties, and negotiate this fairly extensive set of documents, right? And there's a huge amount of stuff in between all that. Could be just looking at a contract and reviewing a contract, which be anywhere from a couple $1,000s to $1 million plus, right? And there's an immense amount of variation in there. And then on the other side of the house, you have estate planning, which can be anything from, hey, I need a simple will, simple power of attorney, right? Which is, important to get right, but it's not rocket surgery, right? It's not something that has never been done before. And kind of asking the questions is important, but, you're not creating something from whole cloth. It's not the first will that has ever been made in the history of the legal system. All the way up to something, fancy like a, irrevocable trust or family limited partnership or some kind of exotic asset protection strategy that, so I would say on either kind of side of the house, if you will, there's significant variation. You can have, I don't want to say easy stuff, because if you don't know what you're doing, none of it's particularly easy, but you can have straightforward, simple to incredibly complex, and, it will require hours and hours and hours of custom work.
Well, and I'm sure that's what keeps you engaged.
And you never know which one it's going to be, is the other thing.
Yeah.
There's everybody
behind this door.
Right. And a lot of people say, oh, I just have a simple question. And they start describing, it's like, this is not simple. This is the opposite of simple.
And that's exactly why I don't tell people at cocktail parties what I do. Because they say, what? Oh, I have a question, right? It's really simple. And then 15 minutes later, you're trying to figure out how to find your way to the bathroom and make an excuse, right?
I've got a lawyer joke here if you want to hear it.
All right. Maybe we'll do that at the end.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Now, this concept of personal intention, you made it a point to put that on your website as being something that's really important to you. And I think a lot of that has kind of gone to the wayside, not because of COVID, but just even before that, where people get sloughed off onto somebody else or a assistant or something like that. They never get to talk to the person that they originally worked with. So I'm curious why that is so important to you that you structured your practice around that premise, why you feel like it's important.
I mean, for exactly the reason that you say that, that's something that has fallen by the wayside in a lot of places, right? The interaction that you have with the attorney, the accountant, the architect, the whoever's, that person, although they may be very, very, very good, sort of turns into a salesman, right? Of like, you see them the first meeting and they're like, oh, this guy's great. I want to work with him. And then from then on out, you're working with some junior person that you've never heard of, and you don't know who they are or what they're doing, or they're just sort of fungible. If I were on the other end of that deal, if I'm hiring you, I want you, right? Like if I go to get say I'm going to renovate my house, right? I hire the best architect in the city. Well, if I interview that person, I interview 10 people and I say, look, you're the guy. This is the one that I want. And then he passes me off to some just out of architecture school, or in my case, just out of law school person to do all the real work. Like, well, hey, I could have driven down to the architecture school and hired a first year, like that I could have done that myself. So I feel like that gets lost a lot of times. And it's also, frankly, it's a complaint that I have heard from potential clients coming from other places that like, hey, the main guy, the name partner, the whoever is not the one doing my work. They're just billing me $500 an hour for some second year associate, which is, I don't know, that for me, that's the value proposition is clear. The value proposition is clear. And I don't want to accuse anybody in particular, but passing somebody off to a junior associate and saying, look, we're going to build this person at a billing rate that's higher than, most solos to pay for our big expansive lobby and pay for our big fancy building and all of that. I mean, if I were their client, I would go elsewhere. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, that's being lost, and a lot of people would like that to come back or seek out those relationships because they want, especially with important things like business creation, succession planning, estate planning, financial stuff. I mean, these are really, really important topics to people, and they typically want a main point person that they're having most of the conversations with. Now, if you need to change your address or something like that, of course, somebody administratively can help you with that. But when it comes to the decision making and that, then you want to have the person that you picked involved in that. Okay. So talk about the relationship between helping a client with one set of issues and how that often spills over into succession or estate planning.
Sure.
So I'm thinking about, they come in for this, and then you discover that then needs to spill over into other things that they're not even thinking about.
So it's something that happens. And a lot of times where that conversation will start is I'll have people come in and say, we want to form a business. There's 2 partners, 3, 4, 5 partners, whatever. Anytime it's more than one person, one of the questions that I'm going to ask in that original interview is, hey, have y'all thought about what happens if one of you dies or gets divorced, right? And, here in Texas, at least, it's a community property state, which means that if that interest in the company is acquired after you're married and then it grows and becomes $1 million billion company, then you get a divorce, guess what? Even if your spouse is not on those org docs, if your spouse is not there, his or her name is nowhere on any of those documents, he or she owns half of your interest. And if I were in a business partnership with someone, about the last thing that's on my list of fun times to have is to be in a business partnership with a PO'd ex-spouse, right? That's about
never had anything to do with the business.
Never had anything to do with the business. And also now has a bone to pick with you and with that other person. Not only is it's worse than a disinterested third party. It's someone who has an actual real possibility of an incentive to do non-economic things to mess with you, right? Like it's a person who, some divorces are amicable, some are very not. And that person may get like legitimately vindictive. So that's one of the questions that I ask people is, hey, have you thought about what happens if you die? And, maybe you like your business partner's kids, and you have affection for them and whatever, you have goodwill towards them. You don't necessarily want to be in business with them. Anyway, that's one of the first things that I ask. And, we either talk about a business succession plan or a buy sell or something like that. But a lot of times that topic arises 6 months or a year later. And they say, well, hey, we started a year ago and we're getting rolling, and, we want to talk about setting up a trust. We want to talk about setting up a will. We want to talk about, something like that. I'm like, okay, well, you should have had that done before, but better late than never. So now that we're kind of in the estate planning mode, right? Let's talk about, yeah, you have these accounts. Yeah, you have this money. But if you look at the whole pie, so much of the value of the family wealth is locked up in that business, right? It's not cash. It's the shares of the business that maybe are tied up with the key person, right? And maybe you can get key man insurance, yada, yada, but maybe not, right? Like maybe the business could operate independently, or in 5 or 10 years becomes a thing that can operate independently. And that's where the family wealth is located. And that business needs to be treated as, a pile of cash, the golden goose, and needs to be planned for accordingly.
Yeah, because a lot of times that can be the person's biggest personal asset. But by far.
Very frequently. Right? Very frequently. Yeah.
Yeah, very frequently. Okay. Right. And that kind of leads me into a question that I wanted to ask you about entity creation. So what are the advantages of creating an entity? I mean, you and I, it's just kind of, that's what you do. It's common sense, but not to everyone. So what are the advantages of that? And then what are the pitfalls if someone waits too long, or if they don't get around to doing that?
Yeah. So I would say the advice that has kind of entered the collective consciousness of like, hey, if you're starting a business, you need to have an LLC. That's good advice. I'm glad that's made its way into so many business books and so many kind of, so you're starting up, here's your pieces of advice, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the reason for that in very, very shortened terminology is, suppose you have a lawsuit, some sort of liability, some sort of debt, some sort of injury, whatever it may be at your business, right? Somebody slips and falls, calls an attorney, sues for $1 billion, et cetera, et cetera. Without an entity, and this is the other thing that I tell people, without an entity that is properly set up, that liability can spill beyond the business and go to your personal assets. And also, it doesn't matter whether those personal assets were business assets originally, were generated by the business, doesn't matter. If you win the lottery tomorrow, you don't have an entity, you win the lottery tomorrow, a business lawsuit can get at those lottery winnings, even though they have nothing to do with the business, right? So a couple of things that get missed in entity formations. Forming an LLC in a lot of states is relatively easy, but it's not just the certificate of formation that you need. There are several other documents that you need. And I have regularly people come in and I say, oh, do you have an LLC? Yeah, I do. Here's my certificate of formation. Okay, where's your operating agreement? Where are your minutes? What's that?
Especially the minutes.
That's part of you need that. And if you don't have those documents, and if you don't have good versions of those documents, maybe your LLC isn't good for anything. And this is the other, I know a lot of attorneys kind of hate on the online service providers, LegalZoom, Rocket Lawyer, these kind of things. I actually think their documents are of a good quality, but the issue is not with those service providers necessarily. It's that kind of, I call it a multiple choice test. The multiple choice test that they give you when you're doing your entity setup, if you answer some of those questions wrong, you're going to get a document that is inappropriate and may not protect you, right? And you almost need to have a law degree to answer all those questions correctly. So if you do answer the questions correctly, the service providers are great, right? Their documents are they're good quality documents. It's just, you need to know what you're answering on that multiple choice.
And most people don't, right? Because that's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. The computer can't tell you, the internet can't tell you, oh, whoops, you're asking or answering the questions wrong. Mm-hmm. So then that's going to lead you to a conclusion that is incorrect. So that's where the human side of it comes in. If you have that background legally, then you can answer the questions right. For a lot of people, they can't. Right.
And you can't call them and say, what should I answer this question? Because that's legal advice. They can't tell you that.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't get that because it's a website that has the documents on there, but they will not provide legal advice on there, even though the name of it might be LegalZoom.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
No, so honestly, nothing against legal. I think it's a great product and I think it has a good place in the marketplace. Just if you click the wrong button, get ready to have something that might be counterproductive.
Right. Exactly. Right. And that's the risk that people take in using that. And for some people, maybe that's worth it. Okay. So I saw something on your website. I've never heard of this. I don't know what the term is. I'm hoping you can clear this up. What is a holographic will?
Ooh, all right.
Yeah. What? So I didn't know. I didn't know if it was a joke or if it exists or if it's in the meta universe or where it is. So tell us what that is. Give us a definition or enlighten us.
Yeah. So a holographic will, the name aside, has nothing to do with holograms. It has to do with the Latin root for that, graph, Latin for writing, hollow meaning entire, right? So a holographic will is a will that is written entirely in your own handwriting.
Okay.
They are only legal in certain jurisdictions. There are certain jurisdictions where a holographic will is not a will. There are other jurisdictions where a holographic will can be admitted. Now, what I tell people is you should envision a holographic will as something that is useful for an emergency, right? If you are on a trip in Africa and you have a deadly disease and you're about to die and you can't get to a lawyer, scribble everything down in your handwriting, maybe it'll be a holographic will. The kind of, I don't want to say funny, but the quirky law school case that they teach you about holographic wills is there was a farmer up in Canada, I want to say Quebec, but don't quote me on that. He's on his tractor, he's plowing his field, tractor gets in some mud, flips over, pins him underneath the tractor, and he scribbles on the metal fender of the tractor. He scribbles, "In case I die in this mess, everything goes to my wife, signed, Farmer Bob." The probate court admits the metal tractor fender as a will because it was in his own handwriting and signed, and that obviates the need for witnesses and notaries and et cetera, et cetera. So generally it's an emergency device. If you think you might be sick or something and you don't have a will, again, depending on your jurisdiction, I do not advise people to do a holographic will as a long-term solution, right? Go talk to a lawyer because you're very likely to overlook something or maybe write something wrong or have some sort of unintended consequences, right? It's even worse than using an online service provider. But if you're in a pinch, if you're in an emergency and you absolutely can't get to a lawyer and like, oh my God, I need a will right now. Well, if your jurisdiction allows holographic wills, it can be a good emergency measure.
So I should stop encouraging my daughter to learn my penmanship and to imitate the way that I write, because that could come back to bite me someday. Right. Yeah, it could.
Let's
shift gears. I want to ask you, what would you say is your biggest life accomplishment so far?
Starting my own law firm and not failing yet. I mean, I take a lot of pride in that. It's been hard. It's probably the hardest that I've ever worked in my entire life. And that's saying something because I spent 5 years in big law. And it's a different kind of work. There's more variety to it. You're not just kind of single stream, legal problems, bill. There's 20 different tasks to do every day. But it's not been easy.
Any business, if you're trying to make it successful, typically is, it's not going to be easy, especially in the startup phase, the first 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. But as you're finding out, it's so worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and then outside of your practice, tell me something that you're passionate about personally.
Yeah. So I have a dog who's wonderful. She's smarter than I think a lot of people.
That's not hard these days. That's not hard.
Probably true. And I'd say the other thing, I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which is like kind of ground fighting, grappling. Yep. If you any MMA fans out there obviously know what it is. Also incredibly difficult, right? Not unlike starting your own business. You're going to fail and fail and fail and fail. And you're going to be the worst person on the mat a lot of days. And just sort of, I don't know, there's some life lessons somewhere in jiu-jitsu about, accepting the failure and getting 1% better. And that's really a win. And
that 1% compounded over time really leads to something.
Exactly.
I used to do jiu-jitsu. This is back, and then I had a shoulder injury, and so I had to stop. But I was going to save this question to the end, but since you brought it up, I'll go ahead and ask you. Favorite submission that you like to perform? What's your submission move? What's the one you like?
I don't know about the one that I like. I'll tell you the one that I've been working on recently is I catch a lot of Kimuras.
Okay.
I've been noticing there are Kimuras everywhere to be caught in a roll.
And the Kimura is on someone's arm, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
correct.
Right.
It's attacking the shoulder.
Yeah, correct.
I sort of started watching for them, and there's a lot of them floating around.
Yeah.
And there's also I learned a pretty nasty, I think it's called a Peruvian necktie with a gi. And that's I sort of feel bad doing it because there's not really a way to gently. Right. It just goes from 0 to 60, but when you hit it, it's fun.
Yeah, right. Just make it fast. It makes sure
exactly. It's like
the tap.
Yeah, it's like, sorry, man, but we're doing this.
Yeah. Okay, let's switch back into the business mode. I have a few questions for you on the future. What do you see as being the biggest opportunity in the future for your practice?
I have no idea. Continue to grow with clients who I have formed and who are growing and becoming bigger, I suppose, is one. Having those annual meetings, having those contracts. And, I feel like kind of once you pull somebody out of the fire once, they're like, oh, wow, this is, like there's something to this. Doesn't happen with every single client, right? A lot of them just sort of take your word and trust you that, hey, you need to have a meeting every year. You need to do contracts. You need to, have employment letters. You need to do all these basic things. I will say I see San Antonio as growing a whole lot over the next 5 to 10 years, right? Because Austin, which is just a little bit over an hour north, is absolutely on fire. And our cost of living is maybe half or less of what Austin is. And kind of like we were talking about at the very, very beginning of the podcast, I see a lot of room in this market for, the kind of in-between space, somewhere between the old school, small town, do everything lawyer, which totally has a place, and the big 1,000-person law firm that bills, over $1,000 an hour for their partners, which totally has a place, right? Those both have places in the market, but personally, I see San Antonio as there's a lot of space in the middle there.
I guess we could call that your pocket.
I think
San Antonio pocket. Yeah. You can use that. You can
That's a good word.
That.
Yeah, I like it. I'll go with it.
Or stay in your lane, bro. Stay in your lane. I think that.
I'm just gonna make my lane bigger.
Yeah, right. That's okay. Well, that's all they're doing on the interstates. They're just widening them. We are in Florida. We have an everlasting state of road construction, as I'm sure it is in Texas, but that's what's going on down here. So on the flip side of that question I just asked you, what do you think is your biggest challenge facing the business heading into the future? An obstacle you have to overcome, a challenge, something you'd like to get better at or fix?
Managing expenses is always a challenge, right? And there's a lot of expenses that I know they're ROI positive, right? I know that writing that check is going to make me more money, but just there's so many recurring expenses with starting a business that, when I sat down and made my plan, okay, this, these are my expenses, these are my revenues, here's how it's going to match up. This is my curve, year 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just significantly higher than I projected. And I know they're good expenses too, right? Because I'm not stupid about what I spend money on. And I'm very intentional. And I say, okay, is this, at the end of the day, is this going to make me money or lose me money? And, try to be as strict as possible as I can about that. There's a lot of outflows on a monthly basis. And also, cash flow can get bumpy, right? That sometimes if you have 3, 4, 5 people who drag their heels for a month on paying you, you're like, well,
yeah,
I know the money's coming, but guys, that's a challenge. Fast growth is also a challenge. I mean, from year 1 to year 2, my revenues have doubled, and kind of staying on top of how are we going to handle this? How are we going to scale? I mean, that's, not an easy thing to do. I think I'm doing a generally pretty good job of it, but there's, of course, as we know from jiu-jitsu, there's always room for improvement, right? You can always be better.
Yeah. And these are the constant problems that never go away. I mean, they can be dealt with. You can have plans in place, but certainly part of owning a business and managing the growth that you have in the future. So if people want to learn more about you or contact you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, it depends on what your medium of choice is. You can go to my website, www.ryanreiffert.com. That's RyanReiffert. Also, most of, except with the maybe one exception, our social media is Law Reiffert, just LAWREIFFERT. And we also have a YouTube channel that is Law Offices of Ryan Reiffert.
Okay, and what's on the YouTube channel? Is it educational stuff? Or?
So there's a mix on there.
Okay,
there's some legal explainers of hey, here's how to, if you're wondering how to do a small estate affidavit in Texas, here's how to do it. Or, here's the common business mistakes. Or there's one where I've got a friend who's a police officer, and I say, hey, what are your top 5 tips for getting out of a ticket? Right. And we kind of review that. There's some of that. And then I recently started talking about kind of some of the celebrity legal cases and what I think is going to happen. And my approach there has been not necessarily to take a comprehensive kind of overview of like, what is the overall outcome going to be from this, but hey, maybe there's a corner that I can pull off and chew on and explain, like, for example, in the Kyle Rittenhouse case, right? Like we talked about reasonable belief and what does reasonable belief mean? Well, okay, there's an objective component to that and blah, blah, blah. Not going to talk about the whole case, not going to talk about, right or wrong or otherwise, but let's talk about this one legal thing that maybe people don't necessarily understand, that we can kind of bring some insight to one aspect of that. So that's right. The other half of the content.
Fantastic. That's great. And we encourage everyone to check that out. Ryan, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here with me today. It's been a true pleasure to interview you. We learned a lot. That was some good stuff. And I want to thank everybody for listening and watching the Confident Retirement Podcast, brought to you by LPF Advisors, where we are raising the retirement confidence of everyday people, one show at a time. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in and watching. We'll see you next time. Take care. Be well.
You've been listening to the Confident Retirement Podcast with Kris and Mark from LPF Advisors. For more information on them and retiring confidently, please visit lpfadvisors.com. If your ears are pleased and your mind is now at ease, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.